This is a general reading for entertainment purposes only. Watching my content does not constitute an advisory relationship such as therapy or legal counsel. I am not a certified medical or therapeutic professional, and my readings do not constitute professional advice. My readings are for confirmation of what you already intuitively know for yourself, not to get answers from me. General readings like this are like forecasting the weather for the entire planet. I can say that it is summer in the northern hemisphere, but summer looks very different from region to region. So please use your best judgment, take what resonates and leave the rest. And now let's get back to the video. Thank you. Hello, welcome to my channel. This is Bee, and I am going to be talking today about the eclipse patterns that are coming up next week and going into May. But before I launch into that, I wanted to mention that I'm going to be appearing at the BEPC Wellness Expo in Kent, Washington on April 23rd. I'm only going to be there for Sunday. I'm also going to be at the Metaphysical Market in Arlington, Washington. That's at the Stille Valley Center. And that's going to be the first weekend of May, and I believe the third weekend of May. And then the second weekend of May, I will be at the Mill Creek Northwest Psychic Fair. That's at the Triway Grange Hall on Seattle Hill Road. So those are the fairs that I have coming up. It's been a while since I have uploaded a video. I was celebrating my birthday and going camping, and I just needed some time to really refill my cup, basically. And I didn't want to pass up talking about the upcoming eclipses because they're kind of big. I have my notes here, and there's a lot to talk about. I'm kind of going to be changing the format of my new moon, full moon videos. I'm going to try and do the full lunar cycle in just one video from now on, so that that's just one video that I do and put out once a month. And that'll free up my time to do more videos like pick a card readings and maybe even some vlogging. I've thought about doing that. But for now, let's just jump into the eclipses. So this first eclipse is going to be a new moon, so a solar eclipse, and it is happening on April 19th, late in the day, so it kind of goes into April 20th. A lot of astrologers have been just calling it April 20th, but it technically starts April 19th. And that is going to be occurring in the sign of Aries, specifically in the nakshatra of Ashwini. We have a lot of different factors going on and a huge pileup going on. So I've mentioned in previous videos, we have Rahu transiting Aries, and Ketu has been transiting Libra. This has really been about the Aries is yourself, like your self-interest. It can be a quite selfish sign. And Libra is about equality, balanced relationships, one-on-one relationships. It's the natural 7th house, so like contracts, contractual relationships, so relationships where you have expectations, basically, which, you know, is most relationships, but it really does kind of make a difference. When you enter into a marriage with someone, there's like, you literally sign paperwork. You sign a certificate and a contract, and you make vows to one another. You don't necessarily do that sort of thing with your friends or your colleagues and whatever, which, you know, those types of relationships tend to be more represented in other houses in the charts, like the 11th house and the 3rd house. Whereas that 7th house is really about these relationships where you have an expectation of exchange and like certain needs that are going to get met, and basically that you have expectations. Whereas Aries is where we practice our independence. We Mars is the ruler of Aries, and Mars is very much about going after what you want, conquesting. I want that, so I'm going to take it, and I want it now, without necessarily much regard for the consequences. And so it's our ambition, really. And with Rahu and Ketu making this transit, Ketu is the planet of detachment and renunciation. It's very inwardly focused, more introverted and withdrawal. So when you have Ketu transiting Libra, you're kind of taking stock of your different relationships and communities in your life. And you might be kind of really thinking about, like, is this really aligned with what I want? Do I really want to be associated with these people? Or, what else is there for me that I really desire? And Rahu is this planet of desire and consumption, and it's it's the head of the serpent. He wants to engulf things, and so when Rahu is in Aries, there's a big focus and even kind of almost an obsessive quality with looking at yourself and your desires and what you want. Now, this is important because when it comes to relationships, there's often a lot of compromise, and we compromise the things that we want and hold dear to us because we want to preserve connections with others. Whereas this transit with Rahu Ketu is really making us evaluate these agreements that we've made with other people and kind of figuring out, like, well, what am I actually getting out of this? Is this actually valuable to me? And a lot of people might be finding that during this past year or so that the nodes have been transiting these signs, that you might be walking away from relationships, or relationships could be walking away from you. And often it happens kind of suddenly. When the nodes are involved, these are like sudden events. It can be really dramatic. So if you've been going through any drama this past year, that, you can kind of look to this transit. Now, when we have the eclipse going on, we have the moon and the sun conjunct Rahu, and this makes a new moon. It's really challenging for several different reasons. One reason is that the moon is going over a Gandanta point on its way into Aries, so that is in Pisces. Gandanta is the last few degrees of a water sign and the first few degrees of a fire sign. It's like the last 3 degrees and the first 3 degrees. And in Vedic astrology, it's kind of considered this big point of transformation. It's the word itself, I think roughly translates to drowning, and it's literally like the loss of the self and drowning into the collective, and then you come out through the fire, and that, it's kind of like this rebirth and rejuvenation. So the nakshatra that precedes Ashwini is Revati, which is the very last nakshatra of Pisces. This is a Gandanta nakshatra, and the moon has to go through this point in order to come into this eclipse, and the moon is waning, so it's becoming a dark moon. We've mentioned before how the moon is not at its strongest when it is the dark moon. The dark moon is a moon for introspection and withdrawal and kind of looking inwards and kind of connecting with yourself. It's not really the best time to be starting new creative projects or doing things out there in the world. It's really more for this inward. New moons are really great for meditation and yoga and journaling and kind of doing hermit mode and really evaluating your values and stuff like that. But that being said, that transit over the Gandanta point is very, very difficult emotionally to go through. You can even kind of, this past week, like Monday, April 10th, the moon was Gandanta in Giesta. That's the end of Scorpio. Now that is the most difficult Gandanta point in the whole zodiac, But if you felt yourself getting really frustrated, or things were really difficult, or you just were pulling your hair out at things, that's kind of like the flavor of a Gandanta point. With Revati, it's a lot different. Pisces in general, it's ruled by Jupiter, so it's associated with this more spiritual surrender. The feeling is more sublime rather than having the things ripped out of your hands that you were really clinging to. I mean, it can be kind of that way depending on your ascendant lord and whatnot, but in general, this is a more gentle Gandanta, so that's a positive. And the moon is also passing through Jupiter in this Gandanta point, so Jupiter is really beneficial for the moon. And there's going to be, when you have this quality of surrender or letting go, like what you have with the Gandanta point, and of course Pisces is the very end of the zodiac. It's the natural 12th house, which is associated with letting go, losses, and surrender. When you have these benefic associations with this quality of surrender, it tends to be more like a willing sacrifice. And so surrender, loss becomes sacrifice, and sacrifice is self-initiated. It's a voluntary letting go of something. And when you sacrifice, it serves a spiritual purpose, and so it becomes really beneficial to you. So leading up to this eclipse, you might have been evaluating something in your life that needs to be let go of, and you might be willingly sacrificing this. And based on what we were talking about with Aries and Libra, this very well could relate to people and relationships in your life. But the type of relationship is really going to depend on where these two signs fall in your chart. Like if the Aries Libra axis falls on your 3rd or 9th house axis, then the falling out or the surrender might be occurring more so with an authority figure or a teacher or mentor. You might realize that it's time to move on to a new teacher, or maybe you are the teacher and you're letting go of a student that you no longer can keep around for one reason or another. If this is happening in your 10th house and your 4th house axis, then it could center around work and family. The 10th house is work and career, so it could be a boss or colleagues, or it could be your own mother, your family, your household members, any type of conflict there. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lose a job or that you're going to get a divorce or something like that. It really depends on how you choose to wield these energies and what really needs to shift in your life. Whatever ends up leaving you was really never meant for you, and it's clearing out room for something better to come into your life. That's what these things are always about, and if you adopt that attitude, it becomes a lot easier to move through these difficult transits. The other thing I want to highlight is that the sun is exalted in Aries. So the sun represents leadership, especially government figures. I think it's not surprising that, for instance, that this Trump indictment is kind of happening during this time period. And I kind of wonder over the next few weeks, like what's going to come up in the media, especially with Mercury and Rahu kind of messing up in here, and Mars and Gemini. This is like media type stuff. A lot of drama could really get kicked up during this time. I don't own cable. I don't have Facebook. I don't have Twitter or anything like that. I live under a rock. I only hear about these things through word of mouth. So I really don't know or really have much of an interest in politics, but I thought I would just bring it up because the sun in this exalted state, but being heavily afflicted by Rahu, and also Saturn is making an aspect to Aries. This is very much a time that's going to invite in a lot of power struggles. And so on the macro level, you can see that culturally when it comes to democracies and governments and authority figures in government. But in the personal life, you can see this in your workplace, your family, your father, your mother, your spouse, different power struggles coming up. And again, we have Mercury. I want to highlight that Mercury and Mars are currently in mutual exchange. This is a Parivartan Yoga. Mercury is in the nakshatra of Bharani, which is in Aries. Mars rules Aries. Mercury rules Gemini, where Mars currently is. This is a very volatile Parivartan Yoga. So how a Parivartan Yoga works is that when rulers of signs are in each other's signs mutually, so when Mercury is in Mars' sign and Mars is in Mercury's sign, that's called a Parivartan Yoga. And these yogas confer great strength to the planets. The planets that are involved in these yogas are said to operate with the same strength and dignity as if they are in their own sign. So even though Mercury is in Aries, Mercury is acting with the strength and in integrity and intensity as if Mercury were in Gemini or Virgo. And so with Mars, but as if Mars was in Aries or Scorpio, except that they're still in Gemini and they're still in Aries. So why is this volatile then? Well, Mercury and Mars are enemies. They don't get along. I mean, you can even kind of see their difference in these cards and how they're depicted. Mars is this big, gruff warrior, like he's very brutish, and Mercury is mercurial. He's he's kind of like Bill Gates, you know, whereas Mars is like, I don't know, some soldier. I don't know. Someone didn't really come to mind for that, but you kind of get what I'm saying. They're cut from different cloths. And when Mercury is in Aries, communication becomes very aggressive, very kind of sly. Like Mercury becomes, especially paired with Rahu, becomes very interested in how can I get what I want out of this situation. He can even, like Mercury and Rahu together, make a combo that is kind of like, think of the snake oil salesman, because Rahu is very dishonest and Mercury takes on the associations of the planets that he is around. So when Mercury is around Rahu, he becomes pretty conniving and criminally minded. You know, Mercury is this very, he kind of has a very ambivalent nature. He can be the psychopomp, a very spiritually minded person. He can be of great service and very intellectually bright. And that intellectual brightness can be used to also be an incredible trickster or a thief or a criminal, you know, that just gets away with things. And I think that's being kind of emphasized here with the Mercury and Rahu combination. And Sun and Moon are heavily afflicted in this eclipse, and so they try and influence Mercury, but I think Rahu has the stronger influence here. And then with this Parivartan exchange, Mercury actually becomes stronger, so the efforts to be deceiving are more successful. So that's how you read this Parivartan Yoga, and you can kind of say like, whoa, well, the planets are acting with the strength as if they're in their own sign. What is that good for in this situation? It's great for getting what you want and being kind of conniving about it. And Mars in Gemini, Gemini is all about this information exchange, so lots of communication and even to a degree technology. But Mars is very aggressive and assertive, so when you have this exchange, you have fire and air coming together, and fire and air kind of, you know, makes thunder and lightning, and so there's a lot of storminess and a lot of reactivity. Mercury and Gemini have these mutable qualities, which are quite passive and malleable and changeable. So when Mars is in this, there's like this kind of impetuous type of quality to the transit. And this is going to be going on for quite some time, because right after this solar eclipse, Mercury is going to go retrograde, or at least after the lunar eclipse. Maybe? No, it's after the solar eclipse. Mercury will be retrograde and staying in Aries for quite some time. And Mars is still kind of halfway through Gemini, so we've got a little while of this kind of exchange going on. During the solar eclipse, Venus is in Taurus, kind of hanging out, not really too directly involved with things. Same with Jupiter. They're in positive placements for themselves, and Venus is the dispositor of Ketu here. So it's not all volatile. There is some assistance and support here coming from Venus and Jupiter, but it's not directly influencing the eclipse. It's like, well, all this shakeup might be happening in one area of life, but at least these other couple areas of your life are kind of going well, It's kind of like that. But not directly related to each other. So I think that is a pretty good summary of the lunar or the solar eclipse. Jupiter in Pisces. Jupiter himself is going through a Gandanta, but it's kind of up for debate whether Gandanta applies to any of the planets besides the moon. So I won't speak too much about that, but Jupiter does rule over Pisces. Jupiter's still very strong. Jupiter's going through the nakshatra of Revati, which is all about abundance and, nourishment and really positive things. So wherever Pisces falls in your chart, you're probably seeing some really positive effects from that area. And wherever Taurus and Libra falls in your chart, you're probably getting some positive results from that. Maybe some challenges in the Libra area, but wherever your Taurus is, that's, Venus is there, it's getting kind of positive results. Saturn in Aquarius again is influencing the power struggles. Whenever Saturn and Sun interact, there's a power struggle, and that's because Sun represents the monarchies and the leaders and the government officials, like the president or the king, things like that. And Saturn represents the people, and so there's always this tension there with the will of the people versus the will of the tyrant. Usually the Sun in Aries is really positive, but with these afflictions, there's a real fear of loss of power, specifically with Rahu. So people might be really holding on to their power in a situation and not wanting to let go of something that's really ready to leave their life. And just, during this whole time, so ever since Mercury entered Aries, I believe a couple weeks ago, and we have to watch out for our reactivity and impulsive speech, especially any type of assertive or aggressive speech. While Venus is in Taurus, it can be helpful for softening the speech and kind of being able to take considerations for how your actions are going to impact your relationships when Venus is strong like this. And so taking care not to act impulsively, to really take your time and think through things, especially if you're going to be taking any action during this solar eclipse. Travel around this time can be really hectic, especially with Mercury fixing to go retrograde. Just make sure that you have backup plans for everything, like a plan A, B, and a C. I would really recommend that. Being really careful about your belongings. You don't want to lose them. You don't want to get into car accidents, so really drive safe. Don't drive aggressively. Be patient above all things, and just try and go with the flow. These eclipses can stir up a lot of emotions, especially the new moon eclipse, and again with that Gandanta influence. It's an emotional time. People feel really vulnerable during new moons, And in this case, the moon is truly vulnerable because Rahu is eclipsing it. So I didn't really go into Ashwini much, but this is part of why this Gandanta point is considered one of the gentler Gandanta points, is because we go from Revati into Ashwini, and these are two really, really positive nakshatras. The Ashwini twins are depicted here in this card. They are the offspring of the sun, and the nakshatra of Ashwini is represented by a horse's head, and that's because the myth involving Ashwini is about how the sun, his wife could not really handle the heat of the sun, the rays that he gave off, and so she left, and she left a shadow in her place called Chaya, and the sun fathered Shani and a couple other children with Chaya, before realizing his mistake that, oh, Chaya's not my wife. He went to find his wife, and she had taken the form of a mare in the desert, and he took the form of a stallion, and they mated, and they bore the Ashwini twins. And these are two incredible healers. They're very highly regarded for healing and even medicine. A lot of doctors and medical professionals have planets in Ashwini. So, in spite of all this turmoil that's going on with the eclipse, we have this rejuvenating and healing type of quality that's coming on. Rahu represents the poison, but the poison can also be medicine. So I think that's kind of the lesson with this eclipse happening in Ashwini, is that sometimes the medicine is in the poison, but you want to be careful. Like, you don't just take poison, it'll kill you. You have to transmute the poison. So what are you transforming in your life, and how is that going to help bring you healing? That is the solar eclipse. That was a lot to go over. I'm going to take a moment to rearrange these cards so that we can go over the lunar eclipse. So I'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. So you'll see a lot of things have changed since April 19th. The full moon eclipse, or the lunar eclipse, is going to be happening on May 5th. And that is going to be happening in the sign of Libra. So the moon will be transiting through Libra, transiting over Ketu, and transiting through the nakshatras of Swati and Vishaka. Since the solar eclipse, multiple things have happened. Mercury went retrograde and has retrograded back into Bharani, and the sun has moved into Bharani. Rahu and Jupiter are now together in Ashwini, so Jupiter fully left Pisces and entered into Aries. Venus has now joined Mars in Gemini, and those are the major changes. So what does this mean for this eclipse? Well, Jupiter entering Aries is really helpful for the sun. It's really positive because Jupiter and the sun are friends. And so Sun is getting a little bit of backup from Jupiter here. I'm just interjecting for a second. This is editing Bee. And I forgot to mention that the combination of Jupiter and Rahu is, even though Jupiter is coming in and lending an assist to the Sun through that spiritual wisdom that we talked about, and the Jupiter actually acts as an advisor to the Sun, so an advisor to the king. Because of that influence of Rahu, the information that the Sun is receiving from Jupiter can be incredibly distorted. So, like we had said before, Rahu has a very, this aspect of creating illusions. And so he's also associated with like smoke and mirrors and things like that. So the information that Jupiter has access to can become incredibly distorted. And Jupiter himself, when combined with the nodes, can be incredibly prone to huge delusions and fantasies and distortions, basically. So it's just something to be really mindful of. That between the Mercury retrograde and this Rahu-Jupiter conjunction, the information that you have access to at this time is not necessarily the whole picture, and that picture may not become very clear until the middle of May, and so that's why I keep emphasizing that. And yeah, Venus and Mars together in Gemini creates some interesting dynamics. Mars and Venus are very sexually charged together. There's a lot of passion and desire, a lot of really tempestuous type of passion flowing forth. And that part of Artan Yoga between Mars and Mercury is still in effect during this time. And what I'm going to say about that is that during this time, around May 5th, so like the week heading into it, and like few weeks after that, you might see people becoming highly infatuated with somebody, really wanting to pursue someone. I think especially Mars. I believe Mars is in Mrigashira during this time, so you might see Mars really pursuing some really young ladies or pretty ladies, and that's because of the myth associated with Mrigashira. Yeah, it's in relationships, if you're already in a relationship, you might have a really positive experience with this. If you're on the dating scene, you might see these like flash fire relationships where it's just like so full of passion, but then it suddenly dissipates or explodes or something like that. With Gemini is a mutable sign, so it's changeable. It's not stable. It's not like a fixed sign, and it's not cardinal where it's taking the lead in something, where it's really pioneering. It's a very passive and kind of wishy-washy sign. And Mercury is also kind of wishy-washy. So Mars and Venus together in this dynamic is like wishy-washy passion. It's like 1 second I love you and I want to marry you, and the next it's like I don't want anything to do with you, you're terrible, stay away from me, that kind of thing. So really volatile. Jupiter here with this pile up in Aries, going to bring some spiritual wisdom into this real impulse to stand up for yourself, going to embolden the sun to really take the lead. The thing is that you still have to be really careful because Mercury is in retrograde and this is still an eclipse. So the sun is still afflicted by Rahu. What does Rahu and Ketu do? They are shadow planets. They're not real planets. They are mathematical points in the sky. So they get associated with illusion. And so information that you have available to you during this time is going to be murky, especially with this retrograde Mercury. I almost said Mercury. So be careful about making any decisions. You might feel really emboldened to act, and especially with this, like you might want to really jump into something, but you really want to hold your horses during this time. At least wait until Mercury is no longer retrograde. That's the middle of May. But by this time, you might be feeling really confident about making a decision about something, but it's still just good to hold off until all of these transits kind of settle down a bit. If it's meant for you, it'll still be there towards the end of May. Trust me. A lot of times you might be going all in on something and it gets delayed for some reason, especially with this Saturn aspect to Aries here. Ambitions are being delayed and pushed back on a bit. And it's for good reason. You know, it's important to take this time to really reflect and to ensure that you are making a sound decision. If you feel unsure for any reason during this time, don't push through. That's your intuition talking to you, and really there's probably a good reason. And it doesn't necessarily need to be like a really bad or evil reason or something like that. It might just be that some information just needs some extra time to be processed so that it can be presented to you in a way that is most clear to understand. So sometimes it's just as simple as that. It really depends on the cycles that you're running in your chart. But in general, this full moon eclipse is going to start in Swati and end in Vishaka. So the moon is actually crossing over nakshatras during this time. These nakshatras occur in Libra. Swati is kind of the middle of Libra, and it is this Swati is actually Rahu is actually the dispositor of that nakshatra through dasha lordship. The planets do not actually rule over nakshatras, but when the moon, so somebody born on this day while the moon is in Swati, they would be starting their life in Rahu's Mahadasha. So their initial years of life, so like very early childhood, is going to be imprinted upon by Rahu. So things that are started during this time, you don't want to start something during this time because it's going to be influenced by Rahu during these early moments of its life. And Rahu is a very destabilizing planet. So that's kind of where that comes into play. As moon moves into Vishaka, Vishaka is all about this really hard focus and determination. So towards the end of this eclipse, you might find yourself really being like, okay, this is the direction I want to move in. And again, it's just, you want to hold your horses a little bit. At least wait until Mercury is no longer retrograde, or at least wait until, well, that's when I would wait. I'm not going to give another date. But yeah, at the same time, this is kind of the climax of the lunar cycle. We are ending in Libra, so I expect that there's going to be something concluding, or you're able to move forward with something, maybe with a business partner or a community project that you're working on. And it will have been a roller coaster to get there because these eclipse patterns are pretty they're pretty supercharged. It was really interesting to study this. Oh, I didn't talk about Bharani much. So we talked about how the sun is going to be feeling eager to do something, especially with Jupiter kind of gassing it up, but we are in the nakshatra of Bharani here. Now we see Bharani is represented by a uterus. It is the cosmic womb through which life enters the world and also through which we leave the world. And Bharani is a difficult nakshatra. It is, the word relates to bearing down, labor pains. So Bharani, while it is associated with birth and pregnancy, it's specifically associated with the pain of giving birth, and it's the pain of doing those things and bringing something into this world. So I mean, if you did want to start something, you could, but it's kind of like, do you want to start it when you're most likely to be having a really painful and difficult labor, or would you rather wait for when the sun moves out of Bharani and Mercury is direct and, you know, every other things are shifting around? Mars leaves Gemini. This part of Artan Yoga kind of, you know, cools down a bit. And then you're more likely to have a more an easy delivery. You know, when you want to birth something into this world, you hope for it to go smoothly. So that's kind of where I'm getting with this. That's about all I've got for these transits. To summarize, the key advice is to don't rush into anything during this next month. At least wait until towards the end of May. If you're feeling really pissed off and reactive towards others in your life, try and hold back your anger. Don't act out of anger. Try and just take a breather, take a step back, and reassess the situation. Wait for things to cool down before confronting someone. You can expect yourself to feel kind of pissy lately. Getting easily frustrated with others, or people might be getting frustrated with you. There might be misunderstandings during this Mercury retrograde in Aries. So, you know, when we have a lot of planets in Aries, there's a lot of focus on the self. There's a lot of egotism. And so people are feeling very vulnerable. They're feeling very in touch with what they are risking losing. And when people feel threatened in that way, or they feel vulnerable like that, they tend to become more defensive and more reactive and more attacking. And so how do you cope when the playing field looks like that? You sit out on the sidelines and kind of just do your thing and chill out. So that's the advice I have for you. Just lay low. Go out into nature if that's available to you. I personally would go on a camping trip if the weather was nice, and I wasn't traveling directly on these eclipse dates. But yeah, that is my forecast for these eclipses, and I hope that they were helpful for you. Thank you very much for coming to my channel. Please like and subscribe to my channel if you got something out of this. And if you didn't, I would really appreciate your feedback in the comments. And I would really appreciate your comments either way, no matter what you have to say, whether it's positive or negative. I like to hear feedback and try and integrate that into how I'm filming. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.